And in fact, there's something else that you said, you were quoted as saying, that I thought was equally refreshing. You said here that it's an interesting historical fact that as society has become better textured, legal justice approaches more closely approximate social justice. Now, I found that a fascinating comment. I liked the way you said that as society becomes better textured. Can you elaborate a little further on your thinking behind that?
Well, if you go back to Dickens, when the law was fairly tightly structured, and there were still cases referred to now that were decided back in the early 1800s, particularly Lord Eldon, some of the great chancery lawyers. The principles had their cradle back in those days, the principles we apply. But there was not much social justice, not much sensitivity to the way in which it was impinging on people. It was Dickens who opened up the personal downside of too legal an approach, to realise that you're dealing with real people. It's horrible to have the principles of law saying, well, but sometimes you just got to say it. Well, I'm sorry, that's what the law is, you've lost. But judges don't like telling people they've lost cases. Particularly if you can see that somebody's put their heart into it, that you know how they've been living with this damn case. You try and find some way that you can let them down lightly. And in that way, you're softening the harshness of the black letter law. And that's a process that just goes on subconsciously, I think, with every judge to a greater or lesser extent. You're conscious that too slavish an adherence to precedent or to the letter of the law quite often will work injustice, so you try and find some way to work around it. That's really the origins of equity, chancery law.
There are people, of course, who would interpret or rather misinterpret what you're saying as a form of judicial activism. That has been much in the news and on and off in recent years, where they've taken the view that if a person is able to interpret law more widely, that must be some form of activism, and a judge, to put it bluntly, pushing their own barrow.
Yes, I think it's a fine line between the two, between the temptation on the bench where you've got wide powers is to use those powers the way which you think is right, but it may not be consistent with a legal philosophy that we have to all uphold, part of which is an adherence to the pattern of the law as it exists so that all can be equal in the eyes of the law.
You were the second youngest person to become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of New South Wales. You were 47, in fact. When you presided over the New South Wales Supreme Court, and that was for a period of between 1974 to 1988, what was the toughest case that you had to preside over that perhaps to this day you think about and worry about from time to time?
Oh, that is a hard one.
Or perhaps the one that tested the many principles you've just been describing to me, the case that tested those principles to their utmost.
Oh, many things. I had the misfortune to have rather a varied set of colleagues in the court. I didn't altogether see eye to eye with some of my senior colleagues in the Court of Appeal, and it was often very hard to accommodate their views with my own views and to lead a court which, because most of my work was appellate court work. I loved the first instance work. That was the times when I was a real judge. But as Chief Justice, there's the appellate work as the main work, other criminal law. But some of those I found very taxing in the sense of the different personal philosophies between myself and other senior judges of the Court of Appeal.
So it was not so much then cases you were presiding over, but dealing with your colleagues.
Yes, trying to I suppose trying to create a climate of comity, judicial comity in point of judicial philosophy, which you can't always do. Some people are just so one-eyed about what they think is wrong, and they'll say it's wrong, and that's it. And you can see there's an individual there going to be crucified because somebody says it's wrong.
Did that flow over to the execution of justice in New South Wales? The fact that you weren't always able to establish that atmosphere of comity, as you describe it, among your fellow judges? Did it lead to, in other words, less than beneficial outcomes from time to time?
I think inevitably it did. And I would like to think that it had some influence on my judicial colleagues, who, whatever that might have been our different opinions, recognised that as Chief Justice, my opinions couldn't just be thrown out.
I suppose in one sense, though, it proved to be an invaluable testing ground for what you were later to do with your next career after you retired as the Supreme Court judge, the Supreme Court Chief Justice. You went into a career in ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution and Mediation. Those testing times you experienced were probably very useful as paving stones, if you like, for your next career.
Well, I think they were. I'm sure they were.